March 14th, 2012, my son Thomas lost his battle with the disease of addiction. I now belong to a club that no parent should ever belong to. Do you know the signs? Do you know the trends that children are doing in today's world? Do you know the signs and symptoms? Do you know the signs and symptoms of drug abuse? I want to empower and educate Long Islanders by bringing a force of professionals and how to prevent the disease of addiction. Long Island in Crisis. Good evening and welcome to Long Island in Crisis. This show is dedicated to empowering and educating people, parents, everyone on the insidious disease of addiction. We are losing a generation of kids, of family members, and we as a society have to step up and really educate ourselves so we know what's going on so we can do better for our family, especially for our young generation. Tonight, my special guest is Dr. Michael Delman, and we are going to talk about marijuana. And unfortunately, Doc, right, many people believe that this is not a gateway drug, and it really has no harmful benefits for their children, for themselves, for...
The major problem is the public perception is that this is the same drug that has been around for thousands of years. In fact, the recent findings in China were that there were some crypts there that were dated back 3000 BCE, and they had marijuana in those crypts buried with the people who were interned there. Having said that, it's not the same drug as they had or as was around in the late 60s and 70s. It's now about 40% stronger. A lot of the beneficial components have been actually removed in favor of increasing the THC, which is the psychoactive content, and the cannabidiol, which is the agent that we think is going to have the most medical benefit, has been removed from most of those plants, although recently there has been a group that is putting the cannabidiol back in, or actually breeding plants that have higher content of cannabidiol, but they still have the tetrahydrocannabinol, the THC, which is the psychedelic component of it. It's still present, and it's very difficult to get it pure as pure cannabidiol. So that's a problem. The other problem is that the term medical marijuana is not a medical term. It was never coined by any medical society. It was never coined by any researchers. It was coined by lay people who had only one thing in mind when they used that term, and that was to get people to legalize marijuana. So they said, well, it's medical marijuana because it helps people.
If it can be proven, so I mean, people come out, any child that can benefit from using, the oil form of marijuana, or anyone else suffering from cancer, from anything, I'm certainly not against that. But to hear parents say, oh, they're only smoking pot, it's no big deal, is just the insanity, because, that's how my son started, and he didn't have the turn-off valve in his head, and it was off to the races, that opened the door to addiction. So it is a problem. And at 12 years old, no one should be smoking marijuana.
So rather than preaching to people, because a lot of what we say about the dangers are just passing over everybody's head because of all the hype related. So rather than telling them what they should do, it'd be it's better to tell them what we know and what we don't know.
Absolutely.
First thing you have to understand is that marijuana was classified by the Drug Enforcement Administration as a class 1, which means it had no human value as as a medicine. As a result, there was very little research done in this country because it was an illegal agent. And so researchers really didn't have access to that, nor did they have the ability to use this agent on human subjects. In addition to that, we had to pay for other countries to actually do. The biggest study was in New Zealand, where they could use the drug, and we actually funded some of their studies. Having said that, the other issue related to marijuana is that the cannabinoid receptors, marijuana is cannabis, and we found that there was a system in our brain that was we call the endocannabinoid system that has a lot to do with memory, with balance, with intellect, with actually reproduction, as well as pain and the management of pain. The endocannabinoid system was first discovered in the 1980s. Now, that's really young in medicine, so we haven't got a lot of experience with the endocannabinoid system, although we're learning by leaps and bounds, but it's relatively new. And so now you have an agent there that actually works on that system, and the system we're learning about and the agent we're learning about. In fact, that's one of the reasons there was synthetic agents, synthetic marijuana, if you will, because in the late 80s at the Hebrew University, there was a researcher there who was trying to find, well, if we have this endocannabinoid system, which is something we work on ourselves as humans, what I mean by that is we produce our own cannabinoid stimulant. I'm not going to
So
use the
similar
word.
to opiates, we have our own
Right, we have our own
opiate receptors.
endogenous, right, exactly
Okay.
right, the enkephalins. And so he was trying to look for a good analgesic in that system, and he came up with a synthetic agent, which turned out to be not a good analgesic, but very, very potent in terms of those two receptors, and that was one of the synthetic marijuanas. And then at Clemson University, another researcher, J.W. Huffman, was looking for, the effects, again, of cannabinoids in the brain, and so he developed some artificial agents, and that's where we got the other big group of synthetics. So that's a major problem. Now we do know a lot of things about how this stuff works, but not everything is well known. So let's just look at that now from a standpoint of, are there any medical uses? Well, there's no question that cannabidiol seems to be an anti-seizure agent.
Yes.
And it may be of value in people who are refractory, who cannot respond to usual medicines. So that's one issue. At the same time, THC looks like, again, we're not 100% certain, looks like it's a pro-seizure agent. So let's see what that means. Now, first of all, we got to get the concept through our minds that there are no medicines that are combusted and smoked. So we're not talking about smoking marijuana as a medicine. We're talking about cannabidiol in particular. And by the way, there are about 80 other alkaloids in marijuana. We don't know what they do. We're not sure of what they do. And only long-term studies will tell us what they do.
Or did to your body.
Right.
Okay.
So you have cannabidiol. We can't really purify it that much, but the dosing for this anti-seizure activity is somewhere probably around, let's say, 300 milligrams. And if it's a 10-to-1, 10 parts cannabidiol to 1 part THC, and they can't really separate it without doing these fancy things to it, you would be getting 30 milligrams of THC. Now, we do have THC in a purified form. It's called Marinol, and it's been available in this country. We use it in cancer patients to stimulate appetite. We use it to control vomiting. But if you got to give 30 milligrams, which is 3 times the dose that we give to an adult, to a kid, you can imagine.
Yeah.
And in fact, in Colorado, they're finding that they're starting to
Yeah.
have problems. The other thing is that you have to understand that the people who've been pushing for the legalization of marijuana are not doing it because they love to use marijuana themselves, but you have venture capitalists who are putting up millions of dollars.
Absolutely.
This
Follow
is
the money.
right, projected to be a minimum of a $10 billion a year
Absolutely.
industry. And of course, you know who
Tax
is
revenues.
the expert at this is actually the big tobacco, and they are indeed heavily involved in the legalization and pushing for the legalization of this agent. Now, so I'm only giving you stuff that we know. I'm not giving you any sort of theory that we think about, etc. So we're starting to get data now from Colorado, Washington, California, etc. And what we're finding is the following. Number one, just like big tobacco, when they said we weren't going to advertise to children, we know they were lying.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody knows that. Okay, well now they're saying with marijuana, this is going to be for adults 21 years of age and up.
Yes.
So why do they have pot tarts and little sour babies, you know, loaded with hash oil, etc.?
Yeah.
Adults don't need to be
No, they
advertised in that fashion.
You know, in Colorado, they've had many young people buy a cookie where the dosage may be eat a quarter of the cookie, and in 10 minutes when I don't feel anything, well, I'm eating the rest of the cookie. And they're
They've had 2 deaths, infant
Yeah.
deaths from accidental overdose. And I'm not saying that that can't happen with any drug. Unfortunately,
Absolutely.
it can. But we're introducing something that a baby would pick up. You took little, you know,
Candy.
sugar baby candy. And
absolutely.
so that's issue number whatever it is we're up to. The other issue is that, and you had asked about this, is this a gateway drug? Okay, so if we just look at the data in terms of the collection of information from people who are using other drugs, we find that a significant number of those people started with marijuana. Now, it's also true they could have started with alcohol, they could have started with
Absolutely.
nicotine, but we're just adding another thing that we could do. There are 2 theories there. One theory is that people who smoke marijuana generally also smoke cigarettes and hang out with crowds that, you know, are sort of the other end of the playground because they're doing something they know that's illegal. And so as a result, there are people there who are doing more, and so they could get introduced to another agent like a narcotic or an amphetamine.
Absolutely.
And that's the social theory behind the gateway. And perhaps that is to some extent true. But we also have experiments done in rats who are pregnant. And if we expose the mother rat to marijuana, we find that there is an upregulation of the receptors in the brain, dopamine receptors, that are certainly active in the development of addiction. And maybe if you don't even want to believe that, then the one thing that we also see, and we've seen this in human beings, but not by dissecting their brains. We leave those alone. What we see is that the stroma of the brain, which is the part of the brain where the neurons are that actually make synapses and are good for memory and intellect, etc., we're finding there's a decrease in the development of the stroma. Now, let's take that back to kids. The human brain does not fully develop until about age 25. It stops maturing. So both the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex, both of are important. The prefrontal cortex is the risk-benefit reward rate.
And this is the
center.
last part that develops.
That's the last part. And the limbic system also doesn't complete. And the limbic system is that part of the system that actually has all of those inborn desires to make sure the species survives. So the desire to eat, to sleep, to reproduce, to drink water, maybe even to eat salt, you know, stuff like that. And there's an imbalance between those two. So that's why teenagers are so willing to to try things. And it becomes difficult for parents because they have to understand that this is this is a natural thing.
It
And
is.
it's
So
part
that,
of
well, the back of
development.
the, this is saying, go, 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 and,
And they're getting and they get these and that's why they get confused a lot because
of course.
they got one side saying do it and the other side is not well enough formed to say, well, maybe you shouldn't, as it is in adults. And all of us can think back to what we did at age
Of
15 or
course.
16 would never do now. And that's because of the development of that area. So what happens if you then expose a kid to an addictive agent before that part of the brain is developed? Well, number one, since the brain is developing, if that addictive agent can prevent development, it does.
Yes.
And number two, it makes them more prone to become addicted or to
Yes.
develop addiction. So if we look at that data, again, this is just plain collected data, and a lot of it comes from New Zealand. And what they showed, because they did thousands of people over 20 years or so, it was a big study.
That's a big study.
But all they did was collect data, all right? And what they found was a number of scary things. Number one, an adult using marijuana had about a 1 in 11 chance of developing an addiction. Okay, that's
Okay.
almost 10%.
So that's someone starting after the age of 25?
Okay.
Okay.
Right. And a kid, let's say starting below the age of 18, had a 1 in 6 chance, much higher.
Much higher.
So the risk of addiction is higher to marijuana. The risk of addiction to other things, as I said, is also up, but that's a different kind of mechanism. Okay. And then the next thing they noted is that adults using marijuana regularly had a drop of their IQ by about 6 points, and kids about 8 points. Now, anybody who knows anything about the Stanford Binet IQ test knows that that number of points is huge.
That's
That's
huge.
not
That's
just
right.
like I instead of getting 100, I got a 92 on the exam. No, it has nothing to do with that. This is a huge change in intellect, and they did not recover. In fact, when they looked at life achievements, they found that chronic users of marijuana dropped out of high school, didn't go to college, did not earn the same amount of money that was anticipated they would learn before they became users. And now the question is, well, how much is okay to use? A friend who uses it once in a while, what does that mean? Well, it probably doesn't mean very much. But there are some studies that show that as little as twice a week can have a deleterious effect. Now, this is all stuff now that has to be vetted out, scientifically.
Okay. Right.
And the American Society of Addiction Medicine and even the governor of the state of New York and other knowledgeable people are saying, look, we know that there's some medicinal benefit here, but the benefit should be worked on the same way we do with any other new agent. We should assess the risk, the benefits, the alternatives to
Yes.
the drug and what's going to happen down the road, and then through the FDA process, the Food and Drug Administration, we would be able to say to people, here's the right amount of drug, the right amount of the
Yes.
right drug for the right reason and the right amount. We can't do that now. We don't know that. We just don't know it. So the question is, okay, why are we doing this?
Right.
And why is this country, which is
In such a
so
hurry.
strong, why are they legislating a medicine?
Yeah.
Has anybody stopped to think about why people are legislating this medicine? It's not
Tax
because,
revenue.
Yeah, well,
Profits.
but this is a general public because they're being led by their nose, I
Yes.
think, the same way they got led with tobacco. They're not getting the whole story. They only get a piece of the story. They only get a piece that those people who are for this, and that's a profit,
Yes.
that they're giving them the story. Now, that becomes a major problem. Now, let's talk about the tax revenue. Cigarette tax, alcohol tax, we all know about it. I don't think people realize that alcohol tax revenues have been going down over the past 30, 40 years, okay? But more importantly, if you look at the tax revenue for alcohol or tobacco, and you look at the cost to society, Are you kidding me?
I know.
If I say to you, we get $4 billion a year in taxes on cigarettes, but it costs us $16 billion in health care, give me a break. And
Absolutely.
what makes you think it's going to be any different? And the other thing people say is, well, we'll take away the criminality. Okay, I understand that. However, less than 0.1% of people in jail are actually in jail because they only use marijuana. That's number one. So we already really decriminalized it for the most part in most
Yes.
places in the country, most places.
Most places.
Okay. But the people who are in jail for marijuana are generally drug pushers or using other drugs. So you have to be very careful about the data there.
Yes.
Okay? That's issue number one. Issue number two was, well, but we won't have any black marketeering, et cetera. That is pure naivety and misunderstanding about what goes on. So if you wanted to buy a pack of cigarettes in this state, it costs you $10. But if you go to the black market, it costs you $5. So who's the black market? Organized crime, right? The organized Mexican cartels.
There will always be a black market for everything.
And by the way, I just read an interesting article that these illegal cartels, yeah, they make money, but not a lot on drugs. They make it on human trafficking, which is a horror
Yes.
show. They make it in legitimate industries like iron mining. That's one of the biggest sources of income
Really?
for one of the Mexican cartels is legitimate iron mining. Why? Well, they control it. You know, that's easy. You know, and the country has a history of groups controlling certain industries. All right, fine, you know. But the point is, it doesn't close down the criminality associated with these drugs just by saying, well, we're going to legalize it or decriminalize it or whatever else you're going to do with it. Okay, so that's just pure hogwash. I mean, and it's not.
I
not
think
thinking.
for any parent that's listening right now to hear that your child's IQ at a critical age in their life is going to be significantly decreased, and every parent has such high hopes for their child. Always, it's inbred. So if you think they're going to go and get outstanding scores on their SATs while they're smoking pot or drinking beer, that's a proven fact that their intelligence is going to be hindered.
You know, I think that you make a very, very important point. And one of the things that I read about within the past year, I can't remember the author's name, but what he was saying was that if when they do studies on function for people, let's say, who get drunk on Sunday because it's the weekend,
Right?
or students who do that because they binge drink, it takes till Thursday to be at the same intellectual level. That's, I looked at it, I said, are you kidding me? I mean, I was a college student. I imbibed sometimes to excess, or maybe often to excess, but I didn't realize that it was taking me till Thursday to become as
to get
sharp
back
as I was
yeah.
on the Friday before I started drinking.
So our friend Kim Lauby was here,
Yeah.
and amazingly, just to speak to student athletes. So they have a football party on a Saturday night, and they drink. It diminishes 2 weeks of peak performance training.
Okay, there
So
you go.
you give up 2 weeks of practice.
Without-
Your body goes back 2
Right.
weeks. That in and of itself, I mean, if you really want to meet young people where they are, that's going to meet them where they are. But parents are going to listen to, what do you mean, you know, now their peak performance is going to be off. So if you think you have a student athlete, you're going to have to think again about how they're going to
Yeah.
succeed.
Well, you're you know, she's 100% dead on with that, and it's an important point for athletes to understand. I mean, there are a lot of little things that they do that, you know, are probably not the best.
No, but certainly if
but this they
you're
can
mixing,
control.
yeah, you know, smoking pot and drinking, and then enter a game like football, the chances of you sustaining an injury
Well,
is
and-
going to go up dramatically.
And to expand on that point, first of all, we now have data that says that that our young people are smoking marijuana more than they are tobacco. Issue one. Issue number two is that smoking marijuana doubles the risk of a motor vehicle accident. Now, people turn around and say, well, but alcohol's even worse with cigarettes, and cigarettes are terrible this way, et cetera. And as a kid from the Southeast Bronx, I would say, does it matter whether they shoot you with a gun or stab you with a knife? I mean, either way, you're in trouble. So the more
Right.
weapons that are available, the more drugs that are available, the worse it is. So I'm not saying that we should, that because alcohol and tobacco are legal, we should legalize marijuana. That's ridiculous. That's absurd. We don't have firm data yet. The suspicion is that there will be an increase in teenage use of marijuana in those states where they've legalized it. I mean, that's just plain common sense. The fact that we have not yet been able to definitely or definitively document that is just.
And it's an all-cash
it's just
business,
waiting.
which is
Yeah.
interesting, isn't it?
And of course, you know, the other thing is that many records are sealed. If you're under age 18, they seal the record, and then it's not available to researchers who are just looking for a head count. So,
You know, but if we, even just on Long Island, you take your life in your hands, certainly, when you get on the Long Island
in
Expressway,
particular, Long Island.
right? So now, I would challenge any parent or any person with a family to be in a car. Do you want someone who's impaired by smoking marijuana or alcohol to be driving next to you or against you? Because we certainly are hearing about a lot more fatal accidents.
Yeah.
Or driving into buildings, driving into homes. You know, this is not because somebody lost control. They lost control of their car because of another reason. Just last week in Kings Park, where I live, a little 11-year-old girl was hit on Main Street. She's in critical condition. They haven't released what the driver was
Particulars, no.
doing, you know, at the moment in time. But, you know, if you wouldn't do it to another family, would you want yourself to be that family that is the recipient?
So they did a study on pot users and their feeling about driving, and a significant number felt that they could drive better because of the smoking the marijuana.
Because they're
And
high.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
And they were able to show that that's absolutely not true. But the scary thing is that you can't convince someone who's convinced that I'm at my peak performance because I've smoked.
But they've
marijuana.
done those simulators
I
to show
know,
people
Yeah.
that you are certainly not at your peak performance.
And there are all complicating factors. Marijuana is an experiential drug. What we mean by that is that the more you use it, the more your body learns to tolerate it, the effects of the drug. So what happens is that with alcohol, we know that at a certain blood alcohol level, everybody experiences the same degree of impairment. So you can put a rule out there that says if your blood alcohol level is above 0.05, then you know you're under the influence. It's above 0.08, you're 0.8,
You're drunk.
you're drunk. Okay, fine, we got that. They can't do that with marijuana because it's experiential. So if you smoked it for the first time, you would have one effect, and someone who has been smoking it, you know, for 2 or 3 years doesn't have that same effect, which is fascinating. So we can't put a law in place that says over this limit by the way, we don't have a good way of measuring how much THC is in your blood anyway, but
You'd
But
have
the
to do a
point
blood
is that-
test, right?
well, but we still don't have a good way of measuring how much is there because there are a lot of confounding factors there. But the issue is that I couldn't tell from your blood level of THC whether or not you're as impaired as my wife might be if she tried it because she's never used it and you're an experienced user.
Well, I would think there's a lot of factors, but we're going to hold that thought and we'll be right back after this message.
Thank you.
Why do cats stare when you're pouring milk? It's like they know it's only a matter of time. Time. The only thing between them and opposable thumbs. Imagine that. Cats with thumbs. And what if they got together? Gangs of cats with thumbs. An organized army with one thing on their mind. Cravendale. Well, jog on, kitties.
I think this is a good time to tell you. You're doing okay, Mom. I can call you Mom, right? I know we haven't known each other very long, but you seem like a real keeper. You're not perfect. There was that strained carrots incident, but you're trying. You pick up my bottle every time I toss it out of my stroller. That's high comedy to an 8-month-old. You hum the Barber of Seville when you wash my hair. So cool. And your rub-downs are out of this world. Anyway, I want you to know how much I appreciate you. You know, right? How much I love you? You're doing okay, Mom.
Elegant Properties International is a New York-based real estate company that services clients all over the world. With offices in New York, Long Island, and London, we can help your dreams of home ownership anywhere come true. The home buying process has many phases, and we strive to keep our agents informed by constantly attending seminars and networking events. Our team works hard together to make your clients happy. Investors, let us help guide you through the process of buying, flipping, and getting that for sale sign back on your investment so you can move on to the next one. We put care and effort into our open houses for sellers, and our goal is ultimately to get your contract signed and put you in your home so you can enjoy everything that it has to offer you. Feel free to visit our website, www.epinewyork.com, and contact us with any questions. And always remember, no matter where you are, we will always strive to make your day end happy and at home.
Dunkin' Donuts are always fresh. I made the donuts. We make them at least twice every day. Time to make the donuts. Not a few kinds, like supermarket. Made the donuts. Time to make the donuts. But up to 52 varieties. The donuts. Time to make the donuts. I made the donuts. Dunkin' Donuts, up to 52 varieties, fresh day and night. No supermarket can say.
Welcome back to Long Island in Crisis, and I'm sitting here with Dr. Delman, and very interesting subject, you know, marijuana, and it seems so innocent to most people, like not a big deal. However, that being said, kids are stripping the THC from it and smoking it in vape pens, and that little dab, right? Little dab, not bigger than,
yeah.
they can smoke that for a whole day, and the levels of THC that's in their bloodstream causing really a lot of damage.
When you look at it that way, that's a totally different type of an experience than it is when it's smoked. Those dabs are extracted and concentrated. They may be 90% THC. And that's a major issue, a major problem with these kids because they're getting much more than they get from smoking the flowers. So it's interesting because in the 70s, everything was the leaf and the stem, and nobody went near the flower. And then with this botanical geniuses that started working with it, now everybody wants the flower, and nobody, because that's the highest alkaloid content. So and now they're extracting that, and they're making hash oil out of it, and they're doing that waxing thing
That
you're
waxing
talking, the
thing,
dab,
which
and
is
and by the way, just preparing that is dangerous, because that can explode.
absolutely. So
Yeah,
they
using
they put it
butane.
in that
Yeah.
container, fill it with butane.
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm pretty sure that butane is probably not for human consumption.
No, it's not. It's
So
a
they strip that,
flammable gas.
and then they, with a
Yeah.
a torch,
Right.
burn off the butane, and they're left with that wax.
Yeah.
All
Which is
while
highly
doing this,
concentrated.
highly concentrated.
And if they're not careful, they'll blow themselves up. So.
Absolutely. And then they can bring those vape pens to school, and nobody even put a flavored oil in there. There's no odor. There's no anything.
I don't know about odor. Is that true?
That's
yeah.
true. There's no odor.
Okay. Well, that's an issue, and of course, when people don't want to be caught, then they turn to synthetics, and that's a whole other ballgame.
That's a whole and so many children, right, laying in nursing homes now because they've had psychotic breaks.
We've and that's an important point you brought up that I did not mention, which is that marijuana can unmask schizophrenia by the average is 7 years. What I mean by that is that schizophrenia generally develops in your mid-20s.
Okay.
It's a terrible disease.
It is a terrible
Hopefully, we're getting close to a better understanding and some agents that may help us to alleviate that condition. But there's no question that the use of marijuana, as well as some other drugs, but marijuana is what we're speaking about, will actually unmask the disease as much as 7 years prior to when it would develop. In addition to that, of course, we have the synthetics now that can mimic schizophrenia, and you don't know what you're dealing with if the person's taking a synthetic. And the problem with synthetics is they don't test out for synthetics unless you specifically ask for it. So the emergency departments are starting to run into trouble. I saw one description that said, if it takes 4 cops to hold the person down and they're screaming and yelling, spitting and biting, it's probably synthetic marijuana. I looked at
Can
it.
you imagine, though, coming across that? And
We're coming across it. We're seeing it
I know,
almost
but
every day in the
being,
e-days.
and finding people in this state, and maybe never being able to come back from that state.
Yeah.
That's frightening.
Well, if they unmask their schizophrenia, then that's a major problem. And the reason I said that we're getting close to an answer on schizophrenia, as not just from what I read, obviously that's where it comes from, but the fact of the matter is that, as with any disease, the later you get it in terms of modern day science, the better the chance we'll have something decent to treat you with. So if it's 7 years, well, in 7 years from now, maybe we'll have a miracle drug for
Absolutely.
schizophrenia.
Absolutely.
I don't know that that's going to happen, but
But we don't
But
know.
maybe, right.
we don't know. But
So-
the synthetics, they're supposed to be against the law, but you can buy them in a bodega. You can buy them at the gas station. There are places that are selling these drugs that no one should be consuming.
and they're not
Regulated.
They're not
they're
regulated. They're not produced with what they call good manufacturing processes, which means that you can bank on getting the same dose each time. You can't. Excuse me. They actually just spray it on any kind of plant. Like regular. They go out in the garden and pick some grass and they put, I don't mean to use grass in that term, but they pick up some of the grass outside and they spread it out, and then they take the synthetic and they spray it on, and whether you get more here and less there, they don't care. They put it all in the same package. So you can actually take the material in a package and smoke it and say, oh, this is nothing, and then take from the same package the same amount, and you get hit with this, huge
yeah.
amount because that's the way it got sprayed on. It's really a major problem, and it's not marijuana. It's
No,
synthetic.
it's not.
It's a synthetic chemical agent that affects the two receptors, the two cannabinoid receptors. We have two of them in our brains, a cannabinoid 1 and cannabinoid 2. The theory is that one modulates the other, but when you smoke the synthetic, they both get hit hard, which is not characteristic of plain THC, but is characteristic of those synthetics, and that is what allows the person to go kaplooey,
could
or
just go
induces them
crazy.
to go
Right.
kaplooey.
It's
That's
crazy,
a good
but
medical
you know,
term, kaplooey.
kaplooey. Yes, I often have heard that. When we talk about adolescence, though, first off, addiction really can start. The earlier you start using a substance, the more likely you are to develop the disease of addiction.
Sure,
So that is a proven fact, correct?
correct.
So if we
You have a
have
developing brain that's
We're-
not really
with the
developed
develop-
yet.
right.
Yeah.
why do we have kids that are so anxious then? Are they anxious prior to using something to help with their anxiety, or by allowing them to, seemingly thinking that marijuana is harmless to them, that in and of itself is going to create anxiety in young people?
So, two things happen. Number one, the single biggest risk factor for developing addiction of any type is your family history.
Absolutely.
At least 60% of addiction is genetically predetermined. May even be higher than that according to some researchers. So having said that, anybody who's got a family history, I'm not talking about their great-grandfather or their mother's distant cousin or something, but if mother or father has a history of addiction to alcohol or other drugs, I'm not so sure about tobacco, but probably that's true too, then the offspring, the children, have a higher risk. The fact that they're taking a risk is almost, as I said before, normal for a teenager because they got the limbic system. But you mentioned something that is another issue that we're dealing with in many different areas, and that is the stress that's placed on young people now. It's a major, major problem that I don't think anybody has a good answer for, because on the one hand you have a group that says, well, you have to decompress them, you got to find places for them to relieve their stress, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to tell them in advance when your lecture is going to have a word in it that may stress one of your students. That's happening in some of the colleges now. Professor has to list in advance what he thinks may be stressors to his class. I'm not in that kind of academic, so I can't comment on it. But I read about it.
I have no comment to that.
and then you have the other group that says, you know what, stress is not necessarily bad. Stress is actually what induces people to excel. They use that, if it's not destructive, they use that to study harder, or to work harder at a sport, or to do something like that. And it's not necessarily unhealthy. I don't know what the right balance is between using the stress to create something better, or allowing the stress to be destructive. I know that there are both sides.
Well, there are balances,
Yes.
and that's going to be individual to every. There are going to be certain, especially in adolescents, certain adolescents that will be pushed forward to success. And there are a lot of them that are not being pushed forward. But besides just the normal everyday stress of academics or school, they have a computer that they carry around that they call a phone, that no parent knows if they're being bullied, if they're being ridiculed, they are never shut off from that. And every brain needs a break.
So we've made it now a crime to bully people, in particular kids. You know, I look at my grandchildren and my children on one side, where the phone is, and all of the phones in the house, 4 phones for 4 people, are all tied together. So nobody gets anything that nobody else can see. Works out great.
That
They
works
know
out.
exactly what's happening. They know if something's going to be going down. They know if the kid's being bullied. They know because they get the same thing. I had that happen. I was trying to help my wife with her phone, and I ended up putting it on a shared thing, and I'm getting her emails. I don't know what the heck she's talking about. And then I said, oh, I don't want to get these anyway because I don't know what she's doing. But so parents do have a way
They have
of doing
control.
that, and yeah, and there are blocking programs that go on. There are schools that are involved with this. My the 2 grandchildren in Georgia go to schools where they do not permit cell phones. They don't permit them in school. We're supplying everything. You want to use your phone after school.
As a
Otherwise,
parent,
you can't have it.
if I really need to contact my child, I
Call
go
the
through the
school.
main app.
A-
Absolutely.
That's exactly right.
Absolutely.
That's what they do. So, and that, you know, well, it stresses some kids, of course, they're separated from their phone. But at the same time,
It's very freeing, though, too.
they supply the comfort care that's needed for those kids.
Yes.
And so they're never really alone, and they're not really out of contact, as you said. There's always the dean's office to, you know, the principal's office. if it's not
Absolutely.
a dean, and
But they can also interact with people instead of,
Very
you
good
know,
point.
and they're losing the human contact part of it.
Right.
You know,
So what happened? They don't even talk to each other, they text.
They text.
I can't understand that. Why can't you push the button and say hello instead of saying
It's a whole new world.
But that, you know, we stray away from your topic tonight,
Yes.
which is marijuana, and I'm not sure that we didn't, you know, cover most of the significant bases on it. What we are seeing is there's clearly an increased use, and one of the things that they do in from the University of Michigan in monitoring the future is that they call thousands of kids and they introduce themselves, and every answer is anonymous, so they get a pretty good idea of what's for real and what's not for real, and they have an algorithm that tells them when the kid is just grandstanding or something there. Nevertheless, what they've noted is a gradual a decrease in the perception that marijuana is dangerous because it's being legalized. So as that perception goes down, they're seeing the use of marijuana go up, as you would anticipate.
Absolutely.
It's interesting that tobacco use continues to go down in high schools. When you get out of high school and you get to college, those programs that were anti-nicotine, anti-tobacco are no longer present, and we see a little blip up. Okay. so-
Interesting,
yeah.
just to
well,
pick up
that's
that
what happened,
habit.
out of sight, out of
Yeah,
mind. So,
out of sight,
so,
out of mind.
so the scary thing is that unintentionally, those people who are saying we should legalize it are actually encouraging young people to use it, not directly, obviously, although I think that at some point there is a direct stimulus to use it, because as big tobacco was proven to show that the people that were using nicotine were dying, and their source of income was dependent upon the people who were going to start using it or were young enough not to be dying, and so they targeted young people.
Young people.
I mean, there's no question about it, and they eventually admitted that. They lied to Congress. They did everything that, you know.
Here's a question for the doctor with a specialty in addiction, because I've had John Venza from Outreach on, and
Great guy.
unbelievable, but in his adolescent program, the highly addictiveness of marijuana,
Yeah,
that kids have to be inpatient.
yeah. That's possible. Because it's an addiction.
Yeah.
1 in 6 are going to get. Now, let me give you just one more figure because we're going to run out of time, but this was fascinating. If you look at the data from Colorado, the guy who's using medical marijuana is 32 years old, has a history of substance use disorder, and does not have a a medical problem. In fact, less than 5% of the medical marijuana is being used by people who need it for their medical problem. Otherwise, they're just using
They're
it.
just
That's
using
it.
it.
It's
They're
an
just using
excuse,
it.
and they advertise it that way. You got to see the billboards. I mean, if you go online, you Google the billboards for marijuana, you'll see. Come to our doctor, you'll get the right diagnosis, and go down to our dispensary and pick up your marijuana. Or when it's legal, that's when it's medical. When it's legal in some of those states, they're giving it away. Get a free joint. I just saw this ad. Get a free joint with every ticket you buy for some game or something like that.
It,
I run out of things to say.
it's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling. So, you know, would I drink, you know, liquid plumber then also? Because I can't understand how people, you know, perceive this, that it's still okay.
Well, in
As-
Holland, the teenagers now are saying, no, you should not make this thing any easier to get. And they're actually reversing their commercialization. They never legalized it, but they commercialized it. And now they've closed a lot of those coffee shops that they were having. Those are closing down. A lot of the students now are saying this is not a good thing. This is not a good drug. We don't think it should be sold. You can't buy it now in Holland unless you're a resident of Holland. Because tourists used to go
To do whatever they
won't
wanted to
sell
do
it now,
there,
and,
yeah.
And they're recognizing, they're way ahead of us in terms of that, but they're also behind the whole European nation because they have a high incidence of substance use treatment issues because of their liberalization at the time, which they're now reversing. But
You know,
level
if we
one.
can get our kids to the age of at least consent, which is 21 now, and they just didn't, did anyone just say we're going to raise the drinking age from 18 to 21 because they thought it was a good idea, Doc? Or was there a basis?
there was basis. The
Oh, there
insurance
was a
companies
basis.
did.
There you go. Oh,
They showed that, and they still show that the highest accident rate and adverse consequence of alcohol was occurring in the 18 to 25 age group. So they raised it to 21. You still get a high risk from 21 to 25.
and that could be
But
why you
they
can't
re-
rent a car.
If they diminished it, well, yeah, that's exactly why.
Exactly.
Unless you're in the U.S. Army, the drinking age is 18.
Yes.
Because if you're going to
If you-
die,
if you could
risk
give
your
your-
life,
yeah.
which is strange. It's sort of perverse. Are you kidding me? I mean, just because I'm going to risk my life, I'm allowed to drink at age 18 and risk my life that way?
And risk my life.
By the way, it's
yeah.
only in an Army base. You can't drink off base. It's only in the Army base. But the PX, you can't because you're in the Army.
Kind of doesn't
You
make
know?
any sense, but who's
Didn't
talking?
make
But
sense to put a carton of cigarettes in the K rations that they gave to every troop that they used to.
you know, we always give kind of the same examples, but when I came home from the hospital, my mom held me in her arms. We know now, in today's world, that's not a good way to come home from the hospital. You have to be in a 5-point car seat, you're safe. So why subject or allow your child, you know, turn a blind eye to something that you know is damaging them mentally, physically, spiritually, in all ways? If we can get them to an age, even the age of 20 or 21, they stand a much better chance of not turning that switch on for the disease of addiction. Because once that's on,
You're right. It
You're-
becomes life-changing.
it's life-changing, it's life-altering, and it's a lifelong disease that you have to treat.
Yes. I have no comment other than to say I'm behind you 100%. There's no question about it. And what happens, unfortunately, is that parents turn around and they say, or grandparents, they say, well, you know what, I did it. And they're saying, hey, if you did it, why can't I do it? And the answer is, quite honestly, we didn't know what we know now.
Exactly.
So it's not a function of,
And I was, and I got lucky. I got lucky that nothing happened, because if we all go back and look at
Yeah.
our high school classes, a lot of people weren't as lucky.
That's true.
You know, so if we know better, we have to do better.
That's true.
So we just want these. There is nobody under the age of 18 that says, I think I'll be a heroin addict. It all starts someplace else. So with that kind of epidemic that's all across the United States right now, why open the door? You know, would you let a burglar in that only steals your TV and not your jewelry? No, not really. So, you know, just think that whole thing through, what you allow and what you don't allow, and the consequences of each action.
Yep.
Yep.
I'm with you.
Yeah. It's crazy. It's very frightening. The synthetics, very frightening, what's going on today.
Well, and there are no easy answers because we don't want to preach. And I
No.
hope we didn't come across this evening as preaching. I just wanted the people to understand that
It's
there is-
education.
right.
It's empowerment.
Right, there's
If
more,
you
right.
know the cause and effects of the what you're allowing your individual children to do, and you're good with that decision, and you're good with any consequence that could come from you turning a blind eye or saying it's okay, that's your journey. Nobody's going to criticize you, but knowledge is power. Education is power.
Well, I hope we gave them a good earful.
I think so.
So
I want to thank you so much for coming by tonight, and I can't believe it's an hour already. I want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight, and wish you a happy, healthy holiday season. But we'll be here next week, and Millicent Garofolo is going to join me again, and we're going to talk about just for parents who struggle during the holiday season, or any loved one that has lost someone to the disease, and how to cope and get through the holiday season. Have a great week, and I'll see you next week. Good night.